What would you say was driving you? Was it at some point it was just pure art and the fact that you wanted to continue extending that legacy? Because at the start, when you started this career, it was very much, I need to survive. I need to be able to live in New York. But at some point it evolved to, I have more than enough to go to Brooks Brothers and just invest and be like one of those rich people. What was driving you towards the end?
That's a great question. Thank you. My emotions, my feelings, my life in the art world did evolve. And after years of having success, making money, living in New York and London and Miami and having the life that I dreamed of that art gave me, I truly loved creating and the challenge of making a new work of art in the style of an artist I loved. Even though I didn't have to do it anymore, I could have gone into the antique business like some people retire to in the Cotswold and had a nice little art gallery and antique shop for myself. I just loved the thrill of it. And I was always expanding my horizons. It was infinite for me. I was always exploring new areas of art to exploit. How exciting it was to go to a museum and thinking, I never really appreciated the modern artists that much, but the more I look at Picasso and Modigliani and these other guys, I love that stuff now. Why don't I start doing this? And so it was that type of thing where it just took me a long time to mature my artistic appreciation, I guess you could say. So it was a never-ending journey through the art world. It came to an end eventually in 1998 when the FBI started investigating my activities, and it came to an end. But again, I was very fortunate. I was never arrested. I was never indicted. I was never charged with anything. And I never stopped faking paintings. Today, I could sell all the fakes I want with all the signatures on them of past artists, and it's perfectly legal. So the journey still continues for me. I still love art more than ever, and I'm still expanding my horizons. The only thing I don't have is the thrill, the intoxicating excitement of watching my paintings being published in an auction house catalog and sitting in the audience and watching it. I miss that. I miss that greatly. But hey, I'm 75 now. I guess I just have to look at it philosophically. There's a time and place for everything. And I'm still lucky to be alive and still be painting pictures.
I love that you brought up thrill, because it made me think, as I was reading your story of some of my graffiti artist friends, and they would say, if you gave us a wall and you gave me the consent to draw it, I would want to paint on it. I would want the wall. I had no permission whatsoever to do it, because we might get caught, and that's part of the fun.
Yeah, it's a passion. They say if you find your passion, you'll never work another day in your life. And for me, this was pure joy. I couldn't wait to wake up, literally, to wake up the next day, have an early breakfast, and get down to work. And sometime I would be painting all day, have no awareness of the passage of the hours, and painting until I was straining my eyes in dusk and still throwing paint on the canvas. I loved it that much. So there you go.
Who would you say was the hardest to fool?
Frankly, I didn't have any problem fooling anybody. I had total confidence in my ability, because I always say this: if a forger, if you don't have equal expertise as the experts that are going to examine the painting, you have a problem. You will fail, possibly. I knew that through the years, I had every bit as much expertise, understanding, and connoisseurship as the best people in the business that I would meet and either socialize with or engage in conversation, like I said, in galleries or auction houses. I knew I was their equal intellectually and historically with artists. So when I painted a fake, I could look at it with their eyes. This is another important point. There is a very necessary psychological component that I would build into the construction of one of my artworks. And that is, apart from the artistic creation and the aesthetic superiority that is necessary in creating a great work and worthy of the artist I'm emulating, it has to have all the earmarks of age. And those earmarks of age, apart from cracking the surface of a painting, which is more obvious, but there's more subtle markers of age that work subconsciously on the mind of the expert that is examining the painting. And that is the all-important examination of the back of the canvas or panel that the expert is handling. Because in every case, when they're looking at a period painting, they want to turn the painting around. And the stretcher, the canvas, any little spots of paint that it's picked up through the years, wall paint, labels on there, scratches, scuffs, everything, work subconsciously and send signals to the expert and tell a whole history of that artwork. I would take chalk, piece of chalk, and I would write numbers and letters, like serial number, on the back of the stretcher, and then rub it off so you could faintly see it there. I had a collection of antique stamps that were lifted off the back of period paintings that I had, and I would duplicate them on color copying machines, age them with tea, and glue them on the back of the stretchers. And the chalk marks and the numbers, what does that mean? To the average print, it's insignificant, but no. It means to the trained eye, this painting has passed through an auction house a long time ago, because when you give a painting to an auction house, they take a piece of chalk and they write an inventory number on the back of the painting, you see, on the stretcher. And as the years go on, those old chalk marks fade. And then paintings pick up labels with numbers on them. What does it all mean? I even had storage stamps from when paintings had been put in storage from long forgotten storage facilities in England even. I had whole collections of these things, and I would duplicate them and put them on. So the expert would turn the painting around, and all these forensic markers that I would incorporate into the painting would work on the subconscious of the expert, and in his mind, validate that this painting is the real thing. But of course, the clincher would have to be when he turns it around and looks at the quality of the artwork. Then there's no question. Then it's just a matter of, Mr. Perenyi, would you like to book this into a sale? We could write this up right now. I would give my okay. He would hand the painting to a porter, and the secretary would write up a contract. I would sign it. I'm out the door, heading for a cafe in London for a nice lunch. And that was my life, and that's what I enjoyed.
I think it wouldn't do you justice, and a lot of people will be wondering as they're listening. You alluded briefly as well. FBI was coming after you. The Mafia was coming after you. How did you get away with all of it?
Well, there was some luck involved with the Mafia. I sold a painting to the wrong gallery one day, and they found out it was a fake real fast and sent a couple of goons over to the hotel where I was staying, and it was a very close call. I got tipped off that they were looking for me. I managed to get away with that and keep the money. But with the FBI, that was a different situation altogether. I would still be putting paintings in auctions today and enjoying myself today and making more money than ever before to this day. If it wasn't for a girlfriend I had in the city that I was living with at the time, she decided to take one of the paintings that I had given to her as a gift and put it into a sales room herself, unbeknownst to me. I don't know why she did it. She didn't need the money, and she was well off, lived in a beautiful apartment in a period building in the West Village, but she did it. And unfortunately, the painting I gave her as a gift was a duplicate of one that I put in Sotheby's some years before. So when she put it in, and it wound up as a promotional piece because it was such a well done painting, it was used as a promotional piece for the particular sale. Well, everybody that collects this kind of a painting saw it and said, hey, somebody somewhere said, hey, I bought that painting a couple of years ago at Sotheby's. What's going on here? Here it is again being offered for sale. So that triggered off an investigation and brought the FBI to my door. It brought 2 agents to my hideaway beach house in Florida where I created my paintings. Luckily, my studio door was closed, but they did come into my house. There were paintings hanging on the wall. I claimed to be an antique dealer, and yeah, I have paintings there. These are all antiques, and the whole house was filled with antique furniture. I claimed to be an antique dealer. They had questions for me, that's all. They wanted to know how I came by this particular painting that was sold at Sotheby's. I told them I bought it in an antique market in London somewhere. They wrote it all up in what they call a 302. But when they got back to New York with their interview, it fell apart fast. And I found out quickly that I was under investigation with the US Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York. That's not good. They go after people like John Gotti and I don't know, all kinds of people. It's like my old friend Roy Cohen.
Serious people.
Yeah, the big time. When you have the Southern District coming after you, you know you've hit the big time in the criminal world. Okay, but anyway, yeah, I almost had a heart attack when I found out they were coming after me. So, long story short, I was shut down at that point. I knew this is over. I can't put another painting in another salesman. I found out what triggered it all off. It was this old girlfriend. It all came out. I had to get criminal defense lawyers. They were in touch with the Southern District and the agents that were investigating this and the prosecutor that wanted to indict me up there. So I found out a lot. They had a lot of my paintings. They were constantly sending down photocopies of pictures that they had gotten in their inventory, their collection, that they knew or suspected I painted. And they acquired those through investigating whatever. And from what they got from the girl that they had compromised up in New York, she gave them a lot of information. So they tracked down a lot of my paintings and she identified them for them. So they sent pictures of these down and wanted to know if I ever painted this picture in the style of so-and-so. They knew the answer was yes. And I always answered I couldn't remember. And so at this point, they knew everything about me, but the investigation dragged on and on for year after year. It made my life miserable. I couldn't make money anymore. Fortunately, I had investments. And having the FBI breathing down your neck, tapping your phones, going to people you knew in the old days that were one-time friends and interviewing them is nothing very pleasant. However, very quickly, this investigation brought in the major auction houses in New York and London. Now they knew that my activities were international. They had my bank records from London banks with wire transfers, deposits from the auction houses. They found out I had accounts with the major auction houses where the funds were automatically directed into the accounts and so on. They had it all. but they were never arresting me and they were never indicting me. It was puzzling to the lawyers that I had. They couldn't understand why. They were counseling me to get myself in the biggest cash position I could, including selling my house, because you're going to need it when you get indicted. And it was a very difficult time in my life. We were in constant touch with the FBI, and they were constantly letting my lawyers know that they have discovered yet another aspect of my career, that I sold paintings here and there, and this person was involved and that person was involved. So this has given me nightmares. Well, if you know all the stuff, why don't you come down with the handcuffs and with the federal marshals and take me up to New York, which my lawyers told me could happen any day. Anyway, we got down to about 4.5 years, and the statute of limitation is 5 years on this, beyond which the charges are foreclosed. They can't do anything anymore. And so what happened was, in the last few months, it got hot and heavy with the FBI. They were constantly in touch, and they were insisting on something they knew would never happen. They kept sending letters and communications with my lawyers, insisting that I come up to New York for an interview. What they wanted an interview for was beyond me or my lawyers' understanding, because they had so much information. They didn't need an interview. They just needed to come down and arrest me. They knew the answer from my lawyers would be, Mr. Perenyi is not coming up to New York City for an interview. Finally, there was one last communication, I described this in the book, where the lawyers gave an ultimatum to my lawyer, who was very good. Roy Cohen was already dead, unfortunately, or I would have ran right to Roy for help, and he would have fixed this whole situation in a heartbeat, I know it, but he was gone. So what happened was, they threw down the gauntlet. They said, you got so many days, get him up here or else. My lawyer, he was a very polished negotiator, a very wise man, and he knows when to hold and he knows when to fold. He finally got indignant with the FBI agent up there, James Wynn, and said, listen, we've cooperated with you for 5 years with this case. And if you have any intention of indicting Mr. Perenyi, you could come down here, arrest him, and we will have lawyers ready to meet him up in New York City. Otherwise, we have nothing more to say on this matter. Have a good day. James Wynn said, thank you very much for your help, wishing my lawyer the best, and hung up the phone. My lawyers told me at that point, be prepared. In the next week, anything could happen. Every day was a nightmare. Waiting and waiting. We figured Wynn was going to send the marshals down. They never came. A week went by. They never came. I met with my lawyers. They said, we don't know what's going on here, but every week that goes by that you don't hear anything, you're getting out of the woods. It's looking brighter. A month went by, and my lawyer said, you could kiss this thing goodbye. Go on your life, write your book, do whatever you want to do. You ain't going to hear from them anymore. So years went by, and friends of mine that were lawyers that I knew have been puzzled. How could they have had all this information and all this time, 5 years to go over this, and not indict me? Well, I wrote my memoir. It came out many years after the statute expired in 2003. I think my book came out at the end of 2012. And when my book came out, I speculate in my book the best scenario I could come up with, and even my lawyers came up with. And that was simply that the major auction houses that would have been terribly compromised in this case would not cooperate in any prosecution. Therefore, their case would go down the drain. But other lawyers argued against that and said they could be forced to cooperate. So there were pros and cons in that. And the answer was never quite settled. However, after the book came out and the whole story got out, I got calls from people in the art world in New York City. And believe me, a lot of people in the art world up there do not like the auction houses. They are treacherous, to say the least. There's been books written about that. And I had one insider that said to me, Ken, I loved your book. This was a real art world insider. And he said, I want to share with you the rumor, the story that's going around on the street. Because when my book came out, it really shook up the auction houses in New York and London. He said that your investigation, you were saved by Alfred Taubman himself, the CEO of Sotheby's. And he said what happened was, and this is the word on the street, you were lucky that Alfred Taubman came under a federal investigation, also by the Southern District in New York. At the same time you were under investigation, he was under investigation for price rigging commissions with his counterpart at Christie's. And that is a serious crime. It's like insider trading. It's that serious. And that was a stroke of luck for you. I remember during my investigation, he was indicted, charged, and he went to trial, and he got 1.5 years in federal prison. And I told my lawyers about that, and they thought that's very interesting. He only got 1.5 years for bilking the public out of $200 million in commissions. Well, he also paid a couple $100 million in fines too, and everything like that. And he had this high-powered legal team and all of this and that. But my lawyer said to me, well, that bodes well for you, Ken. And I never gave it another thought. But little did I realize later on, I was told that was the key to everything in my case. And I could have slept well after that. Going back a little bit, and this was the clincher. I had sold a painting at Sotheby's a couple of years before all this happened. And it was a major painting by the artist Martin Johnson Heade. And it was a picture of passion flowers and hummingbirds. He was a 19th century American painter. He painted prior to the Civil War. He was famous for going down to Brazil and painting orchids and hummingbirds and all this and that. And I loved his paintings. And it was Jimmy Rico that directed me and introduced me to Martin Johnson Heade. And I specialized in him for years. And I made a masterpiece and I sold it at Sotheby's, and it got worldwide publicity. And it sold for $750,000, which was a great price in those days, a lot of money. They publicized it, they wrote papers about it. The world's expert on Martin Johnson Heade wrote a paper about the painting, the symbology in the painting, sexual overtones. The letter was attached in the catalog and so on, and was featured in promotionals. After that painting was sold, and I got paid for it, within about 18 months, it was discovered, and it was bought, by the way, by the world's leading collector of Martin Johnson Heade's, Richard Manoogian. And that was published in the magazines that he was the buyer of this particular painter, because he had the greatest collection of Martin Johnson Heade's, and this was going to be a crowning piece in his collection. The only problem was he found out in restoration, because it fell apart, it disintegrated in restoration, that it was a fake. So at that time, Sotheby's had a choice. Call the FBI, have me arrested, and deal with the publicity of that. And oh, by the way, they probably searched through their computer records and found out this guy that consigned this, he's all over the place. He's in London, he's in New York, he's here. He goes back for years. How many pictures? He must be the forger. So they decided to cover it up. And this is what I'm being told, that they decided to cover it up, and they did, because the painting, even though I was tipped off at the time that it was discovered to be a fake, and I thought they were going to call the cops on me, and they never did, and the painting wound up as a genuine work in the catalog by the world's expert, Theodore Stebbins, as a genuine work in his catalog that he published on Martin Johnson after the painting was discovered to be a fake. So it was like they knew it was a fake. They never came after me. They never asked for the money back. And it wound up in the catalog of the artist's work as genuine. And there was never a word about it. And I went on my way still faking paintings and still putting them in auction houses until the investigation happened. Now, I was told that the painting of passion flowers and hummingbirds, which is dubbed in my book, got the Fat Boy, that was the painting that saved me. Because if I had gotten indicted in the course of what they call discovery, it would have come out that they sold this important painting. It got worldwide publicity. It was discovered to be a fake, and they covered it up. They did nothing about it. And as a publicly traded company, they had a fiduciary responsibility to alert, to do at least an internal investigation, find out if I sold any other paintings, and call in the police. And they didn't do anything like that. So I was told that they committed a crime right there in themselves. I mean, that's ironic, but I don't know if that's true, but I was told that. Now, years later, a couple of years later, when Taubman was under investigation himself, and I was under investigation, and Taubman found out about this painting that they covered up and that they were selling my paintings for years, and he was told about that, he moved heaven and hell to kill the investigation that was in progress. You may ask the question, why did he do nothing to save himself and kill his own investigation? That was not possible because his investigation was already out in the open. It involved all kinds of people in New York and London that were under grand jury subpoenas. There's nothing he could do to save himself except fight it. But nobody knew about my investigation and nobody ever heard about me. So there was a chance that something could be done. I was told by the source that Alfred Taubman, who was a big-time developer and a multi-billionaire, in those days it was very few. He was a real estate developer like Donald Trump. He did shopping malls. He bought Sotheby's as a plaything, actually. He was a big-time political donor, big time. And I was told by this source, he called in a favor by a high-ranking senator to do a favor and get to the U.S. Attorney's Office about this problem. And that's why it never went anywhere.
So this thing was killed, you were saved, and then you decided to write a book and tell everyone what you actually did. What was the motivation behind that?
The motivation behind that was
to help other people the way that the Dutch forger had helped you to start on your own path.
Well, my career deceiving in the auction houses was over, and my life had changed dramatically. There was nothing to fear. I took counsel on the book by a very important white-collar criminal attorney that I got a free consultation with. And he assured me absolutely there was nothing to worry about. But there was one chapter in particular, which I think was the greatest chapter of all in the book. And he said, pull that chapter.
It's not there now.
And it involved the creation of modern art and the sale of that art to one of the biggest galleries in the world. And it had to come out of the book. It was heartbreaking, but I said, still, it's a great book.
We still don't know this story then.
Yeah, if the book goes back into print one day, that will be with the chapter that was withdrawn at publication. But apart from that, it was just, hey, it was over. I had friends that knew all about this and said, Ken, why don't you write a book, and share your story? When my book came out, I had people from all over the world contact me. I had 3 Harvard professors come down to visit me, that wanted to just meet me. One at EG that was there that became a good friend to me. He came down to visit me. He wanted to look at the paintings. He wanted to talk to me off record about my life and the people I knew and everything. I had been contacted by professors from different universities, Cambridge even, and all kinds of people, thousands of people from all over the world. I sold a lot of paintings legitimately as reproductions. So it was a great life-changing experience. And when you write a book like that, there's no shelf life to it. You meet everybody in the world that has an interest in what you do. Even great art lovers, people that wouldn't buy a fake, told me how much they enjoyed the thrill of my book, of wondering where was this going and what was going to happen to me. There are people that come under investigation of the FBI and the Southern District, and it's a nightmare. And they pray, they get religion. They pray that it would go away, that they would wake up and it would just take this away. And in my case, it did, it vanished. It was just the most puzzling thing in the world. And my lawyers thought, wow, they said, Ken, you're the luckiest person in the world. Things like this just don't happen. And I do believe what that person told me was the truth. I do believe that. You know, most art forgers, they have a very short career, but I give them all the credit in the world. They fool the experts, but usually their careers never last more than a few years and they get busted. They go to jail. I went on for 30 years, documented with receipts and contracts and catalogs and photographic proof of the paintings that I have, that I could match to catalogs that go all the way back to the 70s. I did this for 30 years, had a great life, and slipped out of the net. And I'm still forging great paintings today. So what more could I ask for? Why not share the story and meet a lot of new people, make a lot of new friends in the world?
Do you feel like you have achieved everything you wanted from life?
Well, no, I'll always be, I would say, tormented by the what ifs. What stopped me from talking to Andy Warhol? I'm seeing him every day on the street. Why couldn't I just stop and talk to him? And you know, he has helped and promoted young artists when he wanted to meet me so much. It was obvious. Tony and I passed him on the street. Tony turned to me and said, you know, that guy is really giving you hard looks. I said, yeah, I know, but I'm not ready yet. When I get the collection ready. What if I would have met him? A lot of people don't know this. He was one of the biggest landlords in Soho. He bought up half of Soho when they were giving the buildings away. He knew what it was going to become. He put artists in there. He could have put me in a studio after the place fell apart on Union Square. And he would have loved the concept that I had, where I was making artworks and then having them sealed up in steel boxes. So you can only imagine what was inside of them and you couldn't see it. It was a totally new concept. Bizarre, really. And so what would have happened? What would have happened when I lived on the Upper East Side? I met some very wealthy women up there and so on. I could have gotten married. I was good looking. And I turned opportunities down. I would say, why was I always so on my own, so independent? And I think of the passed up opportunities in London too. Why didn't I just jump into some of them? But I guess I was an adventurer. And I loved being on my own, and I loved the excitement, the endorphin rush, and the intoxicant of painting pictures and selling them in these places like Sotheby's and Christie's. And that's what overrode everything. But now I look back and I say, if I was wiser, I should have taken advantage of a lot of different opportunities I had. I should have gotten married to some of the girlfriends I had. Some models I knew in New York. I could have gotten married, had a nice life, wealthy parents, everything. And I didn't do it. And sometimes I wonder, Ken, what was wrong with you? What kind of a delusion were you living under? It was powerful. But you also did something in the art world. I got my little place in history. And historians will read about me. And I lived in a period of art that is historic today, the downtown art scene of New York City in the 70s. And this was my personal experience. One college said, I had my entire class read your book because it's a historic document of Max's Kansas City, who you were intermingling with at that time, what you were trying to do at that time, the atmosphere of downtown New York which is a world that doesn't exist anymore. You could have moved into Union Square and gotten a loft for $200 a month in those days. It was a dump. The whole place was depressing. Now it's all gentrified. It's so cool. You can't afford to live there. It's all cafes and boutiques and fancy restaurants and everything like that. When I was there, it was down and out artists walking around the streets trying to get enough money to go to Max's that night and get a bottle of beer and hang out there and maybe be noticed by, one of the big guys, Bryce Martin or Larry Rivers, might walk in and maybe you could talk to him or something, That was the world of the downtown art scene of the 70s, the way it was, and it's been compared to Paris in the early part of the 20th century when Picasso and Modigliani and all those guys were hanging out at those famous cafes, trying to figure out how they're going to pay for their next drink and living on cans of sardines during World War I to paint those great modern works of art. Well, history repeated itself in New York City in those years. I had my little part of it, and fate had a hand in it. I couldn't argue with it, but I still have to look at it philosophically. If I didn't meet Tom and Tony in Fort Lee in 1967, where would I be today? I never would have looked at art. I never would have went to an art gallery or a museum. Maybe I would be an insurance salesman in New Jersey somewhere.
Unimaginable. You mentioned regret not getting married, but you have a daughter who you rescued as a child from sex slavery. That sounds like an incredible story.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was the adventure of my life, and I won't make a long story of it, but I'll make this quick. Before I had trouble with the FBI, I had in a safe in my house about $1 million in cash. It was always an ambition of mine, a dream. I want a safe with $1 million in cash to look at. And I did. And I was feeling very good. Everything was going good. I was living in London, New York, Miami, bouncing around, flying on jets, eating in great restaurants, going out with girls in New York, Studio 54, having a lot of fun. I turned on 60 Minutes one night, and Christiane Amanpour had a piece where she was showing young girls being taken into slavery in Ghana, Africa, and they were taken away from their family, and little girls, and their lives would be ruined, destroyed. I saw this one little girl that was featured. She looked so sad and everything, and it stuck in my mind that night. And I thought, gee, look at my life. I had a big steak dinner. I walk on the beach. I have a beautiful house, and I had an expensive glass of wine. I have friends in New York, everything. It's just so wonderful, my life. And it was all because of art. And I was aware of that. I wasn't an ingrate for what I had in life. I thought about that little girl that I saw, and luckily I was going to take a walk on the beach when a storm rolled in, and I turned around and I came back, turned on the TV, and this piece was just starting on 60 Minutes. I saw the girl, and I thought, damn it, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to get her free. I got all the money I need. So I made some calls to 60 Minutes producers and so on. They gave me a tip on who they used in Accra, Ghana to get to this place out in the hinterlands, way out there in the Volta region, it's called, by the Volta River out there. And they gave me a tip on a guide they had that took the camera crew and Christiane way out to the hinterlands there. So I packed my bags. I took $10,000 in cash. I packed up a couple of paintings, and I flew out to London. I put a couple of paintings in Sotheby's and Christie's, and then I went to the Ghanaian embassy and I applied for the visas and I got all the shots. I was stuck in London for like a month to do all this stuff. And finally, I was in touch with the people in Ghana. I flew into Ghana, and when you go into Africa, you always arrive in the middle of the night, like 1 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, long story short, for the next 30 days, I was up in this place in the wilds of Ghana with these people that ran a cult called a Tricosi temple, where they took people in as slaves and they had gods and superstition, everything like that. And I was there for 30 days negotiating with the high priest of this village. And it was an adventure I'll never forget. Every few days I had to come back into Accra, stay in the hotel that I had booked out for a whole month, eat some food, wash up and everything, until I went back with my guide up into the Volta for more negotiations that were going nowhere. I brought money, I brought gifts. I saw the girl there, Bridget, and I couldn't get her loose. It was torture. Finally, at the end of a month, my guide, a man by the name of Wisdom, wonderful person, him and his wife lived in Accra. We became great friends. And finally, I went up there with Wisdom, and Wisdom got this guy, this Tricosian priest, told him, "You're playing with fire here. You're either going to have your legs broken by this guy, or you're going to get the girl loose. Now, we don't have any more time. Take what he's willing to give you, which is thousands of dollars, and do the wise thing." And he put the fear of God in this man, because he lived there. He grew up there. He got out of there and he grew up and then he came to Accra. So he could talk their language, Tree is the language, and he could talk the dialect. And he talked Turkey to this guy, and he let him know what the score was. So he went back there, made a deal. And then the girl was absconded after we made the deal, and she was free to come with me back to Accra. She was absconded by an aunt in her family and spirited away to another country. I had to chase her to another country. The evil aunt that sold her into slavery wanted to sell her into slavery again, and took her right out from under me after I was going to pick her up. So we had to rescue her twice from Lomé, the city of Lomé, where the aunt had her hidden in the next country over there. And so it was a long saga, but we got her loose the second time. I got her into Accra. Wisdom and his wife took care of her with another family. I put her in a school there. And I finally was able to go through the courts there, adopt her, and bring her here, and put her through school here. She went to college, and then she did her graduate studies in international studies in London, in a college there, Roehampton College, and she graduated from there. She did very well, and she always got straight A's and always did good. That's my daughter, Bridget. I had all this money, and I just felt I had to do something here. And it bothered me that my life was so good. And what does that little girl have to live? What is her life going to be like? Here I am, with everything I could want in the world, all my dreams fulfilled. And what is she going to grow up to? She's going to be destroyed by these evil priests that abuse these girls in this village. A beautiful little girl destroyed. I said, I'll get her free. I was going to just go over there and get her free to give her back to her parents, but it doesn't work that way, because if you could try to give the child back to the parents that she was demanded from and taken from, they can't accept the superstitions and this and that. So they told me, if you get her free, you better think of plan B. So that was it.
The most epic stories. Ken, you have had such a life. I think as anyone reading the book, there's a part of us that probably go, did this really happen? It's just one saga after the other. I wonder, and many people have spoken to you as well, asked you questions. Is there anything that you wish people would ask you about your life and your career?
I think people have pretty much summed it up. It's usually the standard questions, which I could understand. And how did this all start? It even surprised me, because I characterized myself as the unlikely artist, and I became an artist and learned to paint by osmosis, and I called myself an artist by default. I don't know what else to say about it or what else I could be asked, except that it's all true. It's unlikely. I guess I've never been asked, if you could do it all over again and change the course of history, would you? Yeah, I guess that would be a question. I've never been asked, and I would say yes. I would say yes. I would say going back to Union Square, I would have changed the course of history myself, and I could have continued on my contemporary art. And I had such a great idea, and I had the attention of real important people in that world at that time, that today I would be, I'm sure, one of the important artists from that period. And if I could do it over again, that would be the wise choice. But I have to say, you can't go back, you can't change anything. And I still have no regrets about the life I had, the love of art I discovered, the joy, the pleasure that art gave me all through my life, because I truly became a lover of paintings and art, and a connoisseur and an expert, and lived and moved in a very fine and rarefied culture all the best years of my life, and met very sophisticated people that I enjoyed being around, and going to their homes, their townhouses in London, looking at art, asking for my opinion, whether they knew what I did or not. So I had a great life, but if I could do it all over again, I would have changed the course of history. That very night when the roof caved in on that restaurant, I could have changed everything. And I didn't have the nerve to do it. I was in a state of emotional panic. And I am sure if I went up to Andy Warhol and said to him what just happened, he would have loved it. He said, I can help you. I know that would have happened, but it didn't. So that was it. But I made friends with important people. I made friends with Roy and Jimmy Rico, and those were great friendships. And boy, that was worth it in a way. Roy was a great guy. I know people hate him, they love to demonize him, but a lot of important people wanted to be around him, believe me. And anybody that really knew him as a friend would say he was quite a person. And he had the greatest sense of humor. And we became good friends. When he was dying, and I found out he was dying in the hospital, I wrote him a heartfelt letter. And I told him what he did for me and how he helped me, and I could never forget it. And how my friendship with him led to Jimmy Rico, changed my life, and what a chance he gave me in those days. He was very sick and he was dying, but a friend of his, and I still got the letter, wrote me a letter, a woman friend of his, an actress. She said, I want you to know that Roy got your letter, and it meant so much to him to hear from you after all these years. And it really warmed his heart and made him feel good, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and then to know an eccentric and a intellectual giant in the art world, Jimmy Rico, whose collection today is housed in a special wing that was built for his art collection in the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. You could see it online. And it's an amazing collection. And I was so fortunate to meet a man like him and have him as my mentor, and loved what I did. So he wanted me to be the legacy he left to the art world. Some legacy.
Do you feel like throughout this entire life that you have found your why?
I don't think so.
Hmm.
I don't think so. I have too many whys in my life. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? Why didn't I buy a townhouse in the Royal Crescent when it was offered? Why didn't I do that? I'm greatly bothered by the word why. And I believe that will end one day when you finally leave this world. I have philosophized about it. I have friends that say to me, you know, I would have done anything to have a life the way you did. I had to work with people I couldn't stand for 40 years of my life, you know. and this and that. And I understand that. But still, I think of why didn't I marry this person? Or why didn't I buy that building in New York when I could have and had the money? Why didn't I do this? And why didn't I do that? Why didn't I talk to Andy Warhol? So yeah, those things bother me. They bother me greatly. And I have to balance it off. I have a friend, right? He's a multi-millionaire, this guy, multi-millionaire. But he went to jail, and he's a very brilliant person, smart, intellectually brilliant, a great conversationalist. One of the people I love talking to more than anything, he's fascinating to talk to and get his opinions on things. But he went to jail for 6 years. And he said, nothing is worth that. He said, it destroys your life. He said, you could have done 10, 15 years at the drop of a hat for your history on ongoing crimes, and you slipped out of that, man. Yeah, okay. You sold an asset you should never have sold. You didn't marry some girl that was a top model. You didn't do this and that, but consider yourself lucky. He went to jail for 6 years. He was never the same again. And I would say it destroyed his life, even though he came out with millions still intact. So it's a philosophical question, but I would say those things, it's something I will always have on my mind. But when I get down and out about it, I start thinking about the good things. I slipped out of the net of an investigation from the Southern District. How many people do that? I had a career where I sold my paintings in the biggest auction houses in the world, and how many people could do that? And I wrote a great book about it too. So that's it.
So what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind, Ken?
The legacy I leave behind is my daughter. I still have a great collection of art. What could I do with all the paintings I have in my life? Because I still am a compulsive painter. That's all I could do. But I think about this. What better thing could you want in your life than when you leave this world to be remembered? I think of Roy, I think of Jimmy, I think of my old friend Jose, and I think of them every day of my life. And I have good thoughts about them and think about the way they helped me, all positive things. So I have in my daughter someone that will remember what we went through to get her out of Africa. And when we lived together in the old beach house here in Florida, and I did the school runs and the washing and the cooking every day, and taught her things and gave her the best home I could possibly give her and be a good dad. And that's my legacy. And I'll be remembered through her lifetime anyway, maybe her kids too.
What do you think are the most important qualities of a successful person?
I think of the exhortation in the Bible that says, to whom much is given, much is expected. If you're blessed that way in life, and you could make millions of dollars. I have a hedge fund customer, one of the biggest ones in the world, worth more money, and buys my paintings. He can afford the originals 10 times over, but he loves my paintings. If you make that kind of money and you're blessed in that way, help others. I give great credit to people that do good things and understand that. Help the less fortunate, especially children. And there's so many today that need help. So my daughter is in that field in a way. I had a lot of pleasure in life. I was young and I lavished a lot on myself. But now, as I got older, my perspectives have changed dramatically. The investigations that I went through changed my life, and raising Bridget. I remember a woman at the immigration was getting papers ready to bring Bridget home. She says, well, you know, when you have a kid, you will stop thinking about yourself. You never buy clothes for yourself. You don't think about yourself. It's all you. Boy, was she right. I never forgot those words. my whole life changed. And then I came under the investigation. So it was no more London. It was no more German street shopping, Savile Row. It was no more anything. Then I became a parent. Overnight, I became a parent. I took it seriously. My whole life changed. Even when my investigations was over and Bridget was on her own going to college, I never went back to that life anymore. I tried to live a spiritual life and understand that life is only temporary. I think at some point in your life, you have to go through different levels of understanding your existence and what it really means. And it also says in scriptures, young person, enjoy your youth, but don't do this and don't do that. And I had a great youth. I'll never forget Tom and Tony and how they put up with me at 17 and took me to Max's and art galleries. They live on in my heart. And I hope I live on in some people's heart too, but I know I will in Bridget's. I live a life of self-denial, and I find a satisfaction in that, actually. But I still have my art and I have my daughter, so all is well.
Did you ever speak to your parents about your choice of career and how they thought about it?
Well, my parents are gone now, and my parents were great people. My father was an honest man, and he was a genius in mechanics. And my dad taught me how to take a car engine apart, put it back together. I'm very handy. But my parents only knew that I was a successful artist. They didn't really understand how I made my money, but I just told mom and dad that I sell my paintings in big auction galleries in New York and London. And I tell an amusing story in my book that one of my paintings got a lot of publicity. It was a Martin Johnson Heat, not the one that was called Fat Boy. It got on the AP that this important painting was found in a flea market in England. I told them I found it there, and it got all over the newspapers. And it actually got in the Florida newspapers because the AP picked it up. And it was a painting of hummingbirds and flowers. And my mother said to me, Ken, when you're in London and you go to those flea markets, look around for paintings of hummingbirds because some tourist found one over there and it's going to be sold for $100,000 at Christie's. I wanted to tell my mother, Mom, I'm that tourist that found that painting. So there was some funny things like that, you know.
Did you never want to tell her?
No, they didn't understand the dimension, the illegal dimension of what I was doing. They thought it was all legitimate. And my mother and father liked to go on cruises when they were old, you know, these cruises on these cruise lines. And my mother was telling me, oh, we were sitting with a wonderful couple having dinner. They were telling me what their children are doing, you know, in college and everything. Mom said, and you know, I told him that my son is an artist and he sells his paintings at Sotheby's, at Christie's. I said, yeah, Mom. Thanks, Mom. Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So good. And where can people go to find out what you're doing now and support what you're doing?
There's a website that I have, kenperenyi.com. And I always have a collection of works, and I have to update it more, put some new stuff on. I'm kind of lazy at that. But on the website, I have a scrapbook link that shows a lot of old photographs from the old days of the castle and Tom Daly and Union Square and stuff like that, and some old friends. And I do interviews and podcasts like I'm doing with you here, and some of those could be found online. So that's pretty much it. I guess it's the website is the main thing. And if you want to be filled in on the whole story, then it's my book, Caveat Emptor. I hope in the future to have the opportunity to put the missing chapter in that will be, I would say, the greatest chapter in the whole book.
Not ready to share it here yet.
Well, I would just say this. It involves one of the most important modern artists, and it involves one of the most important galleries in the entire world. And we sold paintings for money there more than anything we ever made in anything else. And I say we, it wasn't just me alone. I was working with others in it. But the the lawyer advised this one could be a problem, and he was right about that. But the statute on that would probably be all gone now. That is so, it's water over the bridge. But we'll see. Stay tuned on that. If the book goes back in print, it will have a new last chapter that will talk about the Southern District and what we believe really happened there, and the missing chapter.
I do wonder, because you mentioned all these people who are helping you. Were you never worried that too many people knew about what you were actually doing and they might actually inform other people?
Not really. No, I had some girlfriends that knew, but they weren't about to tell on me. There was no reason to. Like Roy knew what I did, and he wasn't about to tell anybody. He loved what I do. We were good friends. And Jimmy, no, never, no. I mean, there are people you could really trust. And Tony, well, Tony was a hoodlum. Tony sold a lot of my paintings. As a matter of fact, he sold my paintings to Andy Warhol years later, of all things. I had a lot of friends up in New York that knew what I did. I used to go out to dinner, have a good time. They wanted to hear stories, and I would tell them. But they were trusted friends, and there was no reason to ever think that they would tell for any reason. A lot of them enjoyed the idea that, yeah, you sell those paintings to those uber rich people. They thought it was funny. So I wasn't worried about that until it finally happened with this girl I was living with up in New York City. What made her take a painting and want to put it in Sotheby's when she was independently rich? It's one of those things you can't understand.
Anything else you'd like to share that we haven't covered so far?
I think that's about it. I think I fulfilled another dream of my life, and that was to become a truly great master painter that truly understands the technique and the aesthetic vision of what the great artists of the past had, their secrets, the way they handled the brush, the way they applied the paint. I believe if any one of them, the British or the American or the old masters, if they were brought back and looked at my work, they would say it's exactly the way I would do it myself. So I would say that would be about it. That was another dream that I wanted to fulfill in my life and have.
Final question before we wrap up. For those who are listening who would love to pursue art as a career, what's your advice for them?
Oh,
Yes.
Well, oh boy, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a profound question, because I understand the art world. Now, I could do a 90-minute talk on this one subject alone. See, when I wanted to break into the art world as a contemporary artist back in the 70s, if you were a nobody like me, you could go to Max's and maybe somebody will introduce you. There's Leo Castelli over there having drinks with Robert Hughes. Maybe I can meet him somehow through a friend or something like that. You had a chance in those years of being a nobody, and suddenly somebody saying to you, I'd like to come over to your studio and see what you're doing. That was a time where it really was like Paris at the turn of the century, when Picasso and Chagall and Modigliani could meet an art dealer, a famous art dealer in Paris. They say, I may try to sell some of your paintings. That happened in New York City at that time. Today, artists that are trying to break into the contemporary art world, it's like a brick wall that you can't break through. It's controlled by some big mega gallery international art dealers that have it all sewed up. Believe me, I know their formula, and it's not honest. You have to be, as they call today, branded by one of these top galleries. There's only a couple of them. And then they put you in their stable, and they bring you up along, and they promote you. You might wonder, okay, when you look at the sales of contemporary art in Sotheby's and Christie's, and that's where all the action is today, contemporary art sales, you'll see the big names, the Julian Schnabels and the Bryce Martins and the Larry Birds. You see all that on contemporary art, and other names I don't even know about that are up and coming. But in the back of the catalog, you'll see some like first-time guys that are being introduced in there. How do I, as an artist, get into one of those catalogs. I mean, I never heard of this guy in the last few pages of the sales. Nobody knows him, but he's there. How do you get there? Well, it's those big galleries that have an in with the departments at Sotheby's and Christie's that get one of the artists, the young artists in their stable to start getting introduced in the catalogs. And if you wind up in those catalogs at the back pages and you're just being introduced there, guess what? The investors say, I want to get in on the ground floor. And it just starts taking up a life of its own. But it is contrived. I don't know how you get into the contemporary. I know a guy that put everything he got in the world, his inheritance, with a big studio in Brooklyn and all kinds of people visiting him from museum, and he went bust. He just couldn't break past this barrier. I hate to say it, but it just seems like they got it all sewed up. I don't know. I think you got to have an in with them to begin with. You have to know somebody. It seems like the people that they bring up are already in the pipeline somehow. They're sons and daughters of elitists, and I don't know what it takes anymore. But I hear stories. I went to Brooklyn a while ago, and I got a tour of the big studios where artists rent space. There's millions of them, millions and millions of art. A lot of it was great art, but they're going nowhere. So how do you get chosen? How do these galleries pick you up and put you in their collection of artists? And then they promote you. I was told, if they get your art in one of their galleries and they give you a show, you're lucky if you see 10% of the sales and they'll promote you, okay? But as you go on and they sell more of your stuff, from 10, you might go to 15, and years down the road, you might get 50, 60%, and then you can start getting power and calling the shots and saying, well, I'll go to another guy because you made a name for myself. So you have to pay your dues through the system until you start seeing money. When you hear about these contemporary artists, they get, oh, $10 million for a painting, and he's 20-something years old. Don't think that's $10 million into his pocket. Don't think it. But I would like to be one of them that gets 10% of that to get started. Wonderful, great if you could do it, but boy, I don't know. I would say this. If you want to become an artist, say, and I understand that passion, it's intoxicating. It's like going to Hollywood, getting invited to, some kind of a party and mingle with some of the movers and shakers or actors or celebrities. And boy, it's intoxicating. It's addictive. But boy, I know a lot of wannabe actors, and 10 years later, they're still trying and they're absolutely nowhere. Okay. And boy, I have known so many artists that had the biggest dreams in the world and the determination. And after a while, they become embittered, sad, depressed, and they know it's never going to happen to them. So I warn people. I've had parents come to me, my son wants to be an artist. What would you advise? And I said, don't be an artist. I said, if you don't have your ducks lined up ahead of time and have the ins lined up ahead of time, that's the only thing I could say. Be careful before you go down the road of thinking that you're going to create something original and dynamic and be discovered. I don't think it works that way anymore. It could have happened when I was in the 70s. That's why that was such a historic period. That was the last time it was honest in that way. I mentioned it in my book. You went to Max's Kansas City where the nobodies could meet the somebodies, and it really happened there. So I forewarn people, if you don't succeed at it, you better have plan B and be happy, because I've known people that they've failed and they're very unhappy people afterwards. And even those that have made a half success, where, okay, I can paint pictures and I could sell them through this gallery and I get $10,000 or $20,000 a painting or more in tourist galleries. Even those people that I've known are really not happy because they know the big time is in Sotheby's and Christie's. And then if you could sell there, you are now negotiable. Whereas even though I, as an artist, could sell it, my painting in a tourist gallery and get $10,000 for it. The person that buys that painting, they can't take it to Sotheby's and Christie's and say, I want to sell this. The auction house would say, sorry, there's no market for this artist. When you break into that auction house with your contemporary art, you become negotiable. And the only people that could do that is like the big shots in Hollywood that could make you a star, a Brad Pitt or somebody like that. And you're going to have to pay your dues, whatever it is that they want, before they do that for you. And the people they do it for very often are fabulous talents themselves. But you know what? As I've been told, talent isn't that rare. And I have found that to be true too. The ones that get someplace, they get into that rarefied atmosphere where their paintings get sold at Sotheby's and Christie's. When you get there, then you're like a star in Hollywood. It's that simple. All the other artists that paint and sell in the galleries, even though they make a living at it, they're like the extras in a movie that nobody knows. You'll never know who they are. They're not negotiable. They have to take whatever they can get.
And this is truly proof that sometimes you shouldn't follow your passion and turn it into a career.
There's a lot to be said for that. And maybe, who am I to say? I'm not the great judge, but you know what? If you're determined and you got the guts and the intestinal fortitude, you might just barge your way in there. And I believe that's possible too. There are people like that that go against all the odds. Oh, an establishment that I have to play by the rules, I break all the rules. I'll make my own way. And there's people that do that. Hey, there's people, I mean, I should have known. There's people in the art world today, they may never get their paintings in Sotheby's and Christie's, but you know what they do? They get the funding, they go into a place like Soho, they establish their own gallery, and they put their own paintings up. And they say, forget the whole thing. And you know what? Some of them that could do that, they make millions. So there isn't just one way. But I would say, going through the establishment formula, understand before you go down that road, talk to people and understand the politics that makes those artists. It's the politics of who you are, who you know, who's going to get you into their stable, and then it goes from there. Unfortunately, it's not based on you. But that doesn't mean you can't make it in art. I believe anything is possible. I proved it myself. And but you got to have some nerve. So, more power to you if you go that way. But just understand you're going to pay a price one way or another. And if you could pay that price and stand up to the challenges, you may make your fortune and fulfill your dream.
And what a fantastic interview. I feel like I've learned so much. Clearly, that last part could have been its own series in itself, just to delve into that whole world. But I've kept you for a long time. So thank you so much, Ken, for your time and sharing your whole story with us.
Thank you for having me as a guest.